Hey Magic players, this is Ben with MTG Frontier Guide, and today we're doing a 4-color control deck for Frontier. Okay, we're going to get things started with 4 copies of Jace, Vryn's Prodigy. Jace is a 2-drop that lets you draw and then discard a card, and when there's 5 or more cards in your graveyard, you get to flip him into Jace Telepath Unbound. And Jace Telepath Unbound has protection for himself. He gives an opposing creature -2, -0 until your next turn. And then his negative ability lets you cast an instant or sorcery card from your graveyard and then exile, so it basically gives it flashback. And then his ultimate is you get an emblem with whenever you cast a spell, target opponent puts the top 5 cards of his or her library in his or her graveyard. So it helps mill your opponent out. And next up we have 2 copies of Torrential Gearhulk. And Torrential Gearhulk is one of our finishers for the deck. He's a 6-drop, he has flash, so we can cast him at instant speed. And when he enters the battlefield, we get to cast an instant from our graveyard without paying its mana cost. Once again, it exiles that card from our graveyard once we've cast it, but that can be a huge swing in our favor in the deck. And he's not a small body by any means. He's actually a 5'6", and so he's pretty impressive. He can block most things in the format, and he can close out the game and get the damage in relatively quickly as well. We also have 2 copies of Kalitas, Traitor of Ghet. He's a 4-drop, he's a 3/4 with lifelink, and when a non-token creature an opponent controls would die, you exile that creature, and you get to put a 2/2 zombie token into play. He also has the ability to sacrifice a zombie or a vampire, and you put 2 +1/+1 counters on him, so you can make him bigger. He's already pretty good size at 3/4. He helps stabilize the board against any kind of low to the ground aggressive decks, and he can make a pretty solid finisher himself, especially once you start feeding him zombies and he grows beyond that 3/4. And to finish up the creatures, we have 2 copies of Soulfire Grandmaster. Soulfire Grandmaster is a 2-drop, 2/2 with lifelink, and it gives your instants and sorcery spells lifelink as well. It also has the ability to pay 2 generic and either 2 red or 2 blue or 1 of each, and the next time you cast an instant or sorcery card from your hand, it goes back to your hand instead of going into your graveyard. So in the late game, you can hold on to any kind of relevant spells and just keep casting them every turn if you need to. It also provides an early 2-drop to help stabilize the board and help hold off any kind of aggressive decks. All in all, it's just a good creature. Now we're running 2 copies of Liliana, the Last Hope. She's a 3-drop. She comes in with 3 loyalty counters. Her plus ability gives a target creature -2, -1 until your next turn. Her negative ability lets you put 2 cards from your library into your graveyard and then return a creature card from your graveyard to your hand. Not too often is that going to be relevant in this particular deck. Usually what we want to do is just kind of try to race to her ultimate, which gives you an emblem that at the beginning of your end step, you put X 2/2 zombie tokens into play, and that's where X is equal to the number of zombie tokens plus 2. So if you have 2 already on the field, then you'll get 4 more on your next turn. So it exponentially gets bigger. It's very hard to fight through a Liliana emblem, and so that's obviously what we want to do with this type of deck. We also have 1 copy of Nahiri the Harbinger. She's a 4-drop planeswalker that comes in with 4 loyalty counter, and she has a +2 ability that lets us rummage. So you can discard a card and then draw a card if you do discard. It is a May ability, so you don't have to utilize the discard and draw if you don't want to. Her -2 ability lets you exile target enchantment or a tapped artifact or tapped creature. And then her ultimate lets you search your library for an artifact or a creature card, put it on the battlefield. If it's a creature, it gets haste, and then you return it back to your hand at the end of your turn. Usually what we want to use that for is to go grab a Torrential Gearhulk, put it in play, get the instant spell cast for free out of our graveyard, return the Gearhulk to our hand at the end of the turn, and then recast that Gearhulk again, maybe on your opponent's turn, to bring back another instant from the graveyard as well. And to start the spells out, the non-creature spells, non-planeswalker spells out, we have 3 copies of Dig Through Time. Dig Through Time is an 8-drop, but it has Delve, so you can potentially cast it for as little as just 2 blue mana. It lets you look at the top 7 cards of your library. You put 2 of them in your hand and then the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. It's great for finding exactly what you need off the top of your deck to, either control the board state or potentially get a finisher to help close the game out. Then we have 2 copies of Revolutionary Rebuff. It counters a non-artifact spell unless its controller pays 2. This is usually good in the early game. Most of the time later on in the game, they'll have the mana to pay the extra 2. So we really want to utilize that to just throw their tempo off and to help us make it to those later stages in the game. We're also running 1 copy of Clash of Wills, and its converted mana cost is 1 blue and then X, and then it counters a target spell unless its controller pays X, so you can use it just to throw the opponent's tempo off. It's good early game because you can counter something for as little as 2 mana. It's also good late game because once they're trying to cast something big, you can just pay X, where X is just 1 plus whatever mana they have open. So it's a very useful counterspell, and it's versatile as far as being able to play it early game, late game, and it can target any spell. It's not limited to a specific type of spell. We're also running 4 copies of Fatal Push, and if you've watched the other videos, I like Fatal Push a great deal, especially in the Frontier format, because we do have access to the fetch lands, and it's very easy to trigger Revolt, where we can kill any creature with converted mana cost 4 or less with this card. And then we have 1 copy of Transgress the Mind. It's a 2-drop, and it allows us to look at target opponent's hand, and we get to choose a card with converted mana cost 3 or greater, and then exile that card. So it's very good for the hand disruption, so we can choose whatever spell is going to cause us the most problems and get rid of that card and put it in exile. Next up is 2 copies of To the Slaughter. To the Slaughter is a 3-drop, and target opponent sacrifices a creature or a planeswalker. It also has Delirium, so if we do have 4 different types of cards in our graveyard, the target opponent actually sacrifices a creature and a planeswalker, so it's very useful in the late game because a lot of the times we will have 4 different card types in our graveyard. We also have 2 copies of Crackling Doom. Crackling Doom costs 1 red, 1 white, and 1 black mana, so it's a Mardu card. And it deals 2 damage to each opponent, and then each opponent sacrifices the creature with the greatest power among creatures he or she controls. This is very good against any kind of hex-proof creatures because it doesn't actually target the creature itself, it targets the player, and then they sacrifice whatever their biggest creature is. This is one of my favorite removal spells in Frontier. We're also running 2 copies of Kolaghan's Command. Kolaghan's Command is a 3-drop instant. It allows you to choose 2 different modes. You can either return a creature card from your graveyard to your hand, you can have a player discard a card, you can destroy an artifact, or you can deal 2 damage to a creature or a player. My personal favorite play with this is to use it on the opponent's draw step, especially when they only have the 1 card that they've just drawn, and then force them to discard a card and then deal 2 damage either to their face or to one of the creatures they control. If they do have an instant in their hand, they can respond to the spell, but if not, then it forces them to discard maybe a creature that they could have played that turn or a sorcery speed spell of some sort. Next up, we'll move into our mass removal type spells. We have 1 copy of Radiant Flames. It's a 3-drop and it has Converge, so Radiant Flames deals X damage to each creature, where X is the number of colors of mana spent to cast Radiant Flames. So it can deal anywhere normally between 1 to 3 mana, unless obviously something is making the card cost less or cost more, then it can impact how much damage the card can actually do. We also have 1 Fumigate in the deck. It's a 5-drop, it destroys all creatures, and then you gain 1 life for each creature destroyed this way. It's just a good way to get rid of everything on the board that's not indestructible. There's also 1 copy of Languish. Languish is a 4-drop, and it gives all creatures -4/-4 until the end of turn. This can be very relevant against creatures that might have indestructible, since the -/- gets around that. And then there's one copy of Yahenni's Expertise. Yahenni's Expertise is a 4-drop as well, and all creatures get -3/-3 until the end of turn. But it doesn't quite get rid of everything that Languish would get rid of. But with the Expertise, you actually get to cast a card with converted mana cost 3 or less from your hand without paying the mana cost whenever you cast the card. So then you can drop maybe like a Liliana or something after you've wiped the board. So it can be a very big swing in your favor whenever you cast that to clear everything out. Okay, so we'll move into our mana base at this time. We're running 4 copies of Polluted Delta. We're running 4 copies of Bloodstained Mire, 4 copies of Flooded Strand, and 2 copies of Evolving Wilds as our fetch lands in the deck. And for our dual-colored battle lands, we have 1 copy of Smoldering Marsh, 2 copies of Sunken Hollow, and 2 copies of Prairie Stream. And then we're running a couple of utility lands. We have 1 Urborg Tomb of Yawgmoth, which makes all lands a swamp in addition to their other types, because we do have a lot of black mana cost in the deck. And we have 1 copy of Shambling Vent as an alternative win con that can also gain us some life if we need to. And then the basics that we're running are 1 plains, 2 islands, 1 swamp, and 1 mountain. Now, like I say all the time, your sideboard will depend heavily on whatever your local meta is. Some options to definitely think about including are Disdainful Stroke to counter any of those high-cost mana cards, Negate just to counter any non-creature spells, Collective Brutality is another good card that can get rid of instants and sorceries from the hands, kill creatures, gain life. There's multiple uses for Collective Brutality as well. And another one I like is Gonti, Lord of Luxury, which lets you actually steal one of your opponent's cards and then cast it using any color mana from exile. And your opponent doesn't know what you take with that either. So it can be a very good card in the deck as well. And that's the deck tech for our 4-color control. Definitely thank you for watching. We hope you enjoyed it. If you did like it, hit that thumbs up. Share the video if you'd like to share it. Subscribe if you haven't subscribed already. But we just want to thank you again. This is Ben from MTG Frontier Guide. Now get out there and play some Magic and have some fun.